Hey everyone, thanks so much for stopping by. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy.
After a devastating tragedy tears three brothers apart, the youngest, Luffy, vanishes from the life he once knew. Believed lost, he instead finds himself drawn into the world of the Whitebeard pirates, a crew that becomes more than allies. They become family. As secrets surrounding the mysterious D surface, hinting that they may not be entirely human, Luffy must grow under Whitebeard's shadow, while fate slowly pulls him back toward Ace and Sabo. A story of brotherhood, found family, and the meaning of belonging in a world ruled by pirates. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Nest of Brothers by Shadow Dragon 1717. Respect to author.
Chapter 1. Three Brothers Bond. A boy sat inside the crow's nest with a pout. Young eyes watched the flag that stood just above his head displaying ASL, proudly, raven locks dancing along with the wind. Nah, I'm bored, Luffy whined. It wasn't that long ago that he was playing with his older brother, Ace, inside their treehouse. That is, until Ace had another narcolepsy attack and was now snoring away on the floor. Luffy tried to entertain himself with drawing, scavenging a few fruit here and there, before scaling up to their crow's nest. He really wished that he could fly, thinking back to when he first saw Ace fly. Amazed by the quick movements, Luffy and Sabo watched him from the cliff. Luffy marveled at Ace's wings, how the light had hit the black scales, displaying specks of orange, and when cutting into the surface of the waves they looked as if they were sparkling. As soon he had landed, Luffy announced how cool and pretty he was. The comment had caused Sabo to laugh, only to be hit by a blushing Ace. Luffy raised his fists in the air as he yelled, "Me next," and leapt off the cliff, leaving his two brothers with their jaws dropped. Ace had managed to save him, though he received a hit to the head and was told how he was an idiot for doing that. It only made him cry even more, and Ace yelled to stop being a crybaby. Sabo stepped in, whacking Ace, and explained to Luffy that he was still too young to fly. Luffy whined, saying that he wanted to fly. They promised that if he wanted to fly, all he had to do is ask Ace for a ride, but only if he didn't do anything like that again. Luffy agreed instantly, only a bit disappointed that he wouldn't be able to fly anytime soon. He kept to his promise still, not to mention his brother would probably kill him if he tried again. The thought sent a chill down his spine. Luffy scanned the space below him, noticing a lone figure a few branches below. He observed the top-hatted, blue figure for a moment before grinning like a madman. He crouched onto his hands and feet, his nails growing into talons along with a long appendage sprouting from his lower back, partially transformed. Using the better form, he clawed down the tree, as quietly as he could. He crawled along a few more branches, hovering over the unsuspecting figure. He inhaled a silent breath before leaping into another boy's lap. Sabo. As Luffy landed, he heard his victim cry from his sudden presence. Luffy giggled innocently while he straddled the body beneath him, watching his brother. Sabo tipped his top hat slightly to give an annoyed glare, which didn't last long as he sighed at his little one's tricks. Sabo sat back up, adjusting to the new weight. "Luffy, I thought you were playing with Ace." "I was, but Ace fell asleep again," Luffy replied gleefully, pointing down at said brother, who was sprawled out inside their treehouse. Sabo observed the figure, breaking out in a fit full of laughter. "I take that it is your fine artwork that's on his chest right now," Sabo stated as he stared at the bright colors that displayed on Ace's chest of multiple doodles. Turning to the culprit, Luffy smiled innocently. "It's all right. Want me to read you a story?" Sabo gestured down at the book that he picked back up. "What are you reading?" Luffy tilted his head, curiously observing the book, not understanding the words decorating each page. "I found a book while I was in Goa the other day. It's about dragons," the blonde then pointed to the said book. Immediately, Luffy perked up at the mention of dragons and looked eagerly. Right under Sabo's finger was a picture displaying a dragon that had blue scales along its whole body, yellow horns and talons. But what fascinated Luffy the most were the wings that spread themselves to the side, showing how large they were. He reached out to the picture, tracing one of the wings with his finger, and as he reached the tip he looked back up. "You said that there weren't any books on us," Luffy said, confusion plastering his face. Sabo just chuckled at the boy's expression before ruffling the raven locks with his hand. "There aren't. This book is fictional." Fictional. He raised a brow. "It means it's not real." Sabo scratched the side of his head. "But we are real. Dragons are real. Me and Ace are real." "That book is lying," Luffy exclaimed. "Yes, Luffy. Dragons are real and I know that. The book isn't lying, it's just a story that someone wrote," Sabo explained to Luffy, who responded with a drawn-out, "Oh. Well, it's supposed to be fictional but it's quite detailed and unusual. So maybe it is true. That's why I wanted to read it." "I see. So it's a way to learn about us, he said in realization, leaning closer to look at the book. Sabo nodded, smiling down at him. Want me to read to you? Luffy agreed with excitement, nestling against his brother's chest. Sabo continued to read the book while Luffy sat in his lap, listening to the story. The story was mostly detailed, though vague in some areas such as not mentioning any names or even the size of the dragon. But it was interesting to both of them. It spoke how the dragon soared through the sky, traveling to the most amazing places that were described, how it was so powerful that it was able to fight against giants as one picture displayed. It was only later on through the book that Luffy interrupted his brother. Sabo, what's a dragon bond? Sabo looked to the section that he just read and continued to the end of the page. It's when dragons exchange blood by biting each other on the neck and drinking a small amount of blood, he answered, pointing to his neck. That must hurt. Why do that? They do it to ones that are close to them. It's so they can link themselves together and share each other's feelings. Because they care for each other. It wasn't a question but a statement. Sabo smiled curiously at how his little brother interpreted it. It was a minute later that Luffy was grinning madly at him. The grin made him worry as it meant one of his Luffy ideas. Hey, Sabo, let's do it. What? I want to bond with Ace and Sabo. Why? The word leaving Sabo's mouth without realizing it. Why not? Ace and Sabo are my brothers. Sabo was about to say something but stopped as Luffy continued. Ace gets lonely, you do too. I love Ace and I love Sabo, so I want share my love. So we are never lonely, so I can always have you two with me. Sabo stared down at him, his face showing multiple emotions. Luffy became worried when his face started to change color. Sabo, your face is red. Are you sick? At those words Sabo shoved straw hat down over Luffy's eyes, preventing him to see his blushing cheeks. Luffy struggled but Sabo refused to move the hat until the color disappeared from his face. Luffy wrestled his hat off, staying in Sabo's hold, then reached forward. Sabo stopped in his movements once he felt rubbery arms embrace him multiple times. Glancing down he was faced with Luffy beaming up at him, burying his head into his chest. He surrendered and returned the smile with a sigh. You have to ask Ace, said Sabo, placing the straw hat back onto Luffy's raven locks. It wasn't even a second before he watched Luffy spring up from his lap into the treehouse. Sabo, following after him, smirked at Luffy's ways of thinking, how he always made him warm deep inside when he expressed how much he cared for him and Ace. Ace, Luffy called as he leapt onto the sleeping figure that woke up instantly with a yelp, curling in pain. Luffy, you idiot, how many times have I told you not to do that? Ace growled, knocking his attacker on the head. Sorry, Ace, I won't do it again. Luffy rubbed the swollen bump while smiling. Ace gave a tisk, rubbing the soreness from his chest. He noticed the drawings covering his torso and glared at the culprit once again. Ace, I want to do a dragon bond. A what? The anger quickly shifted to confusion. A bad feeling settled inside him. After all, Luffy's a magnet to trouble. A dragon bond. Sabo's book says that it's a bond of shared feelings, Luffy replied, bouncing on his feet. Oh, Ace shrugged, I guess that's cool. But it's probably not true. He walked away to a bowl of water, grabbing a rag to clean his chest, grumbling about his narcolepsy and troublesome little brothers. But I want to do it. Luffy was crawling onto his back, tail wrapping against Ace's waist. He pouted, face falling onto Ace's shoulder. Come on, Ace. Let's do it, Luffy whined but Ace didn't budge. Come on, Ace. Don't you want to bond with your brothers? Sabo teased. Ace noticed his presence as Sabo finished climbing into their treehouse. He groaned at the teasing. Hey, Luffy, why do you want to do the dragon bond? He asked, still shaking his head, unaware of the sly smile stretching on the blonde's face. I want to share my love with Ace and Sabo. And feel closer to them, Luffy announced proudly, not a shred embarrassed, and Ace turned as red as a tomato. Luffy and Sabo both chuckled, watching him. In return, Sabo was smacked face first with a rag and Luffy drenched with water from the bowl. Alright, I'll do it. How does it work? He asked. Sabo, annoyed about the dirty rag that was now on the floor, handed him the book. Ace read the pages carefully. He was amazed at the contents at first but then he paled, shoving the book into Sabo's hands. I've changed my mind. I'm not doing it, he exclaimed, stomping off to the other side of the room. What? Why? Come on, Ace. Luffy whined. What's the problem? Sabo looked at the pages again to see if he had missed anything like side effects or sacrificial price but there wasn't one. Sabo knew Ace wasn't scared of blood, after all they saw it on a daily basis. So what the issue? He pondered, and then Luffy said something. Ace, do you not love us? Is that why you don't want to do it? Luffy stood there, eyes becoming glassy. Is it because I'm annoying, a crybaby, cause I can't fly? I promise to stop and I will learn how to fly, I will. His voice was slowly rising. Sabo was frozen, his mind thinking quickly. He knew those weren't the reasons for Ace's refusal, but he had to do something quick. He glanced at the oldest brother who seemed shaken by the Luffy's words. It was only after he read how to do it that, and then the thought hit him. He sighed, face relaxing. Why didn't he notice sooner? causing all this fuss? Stupid Ace. Stepping up, he kneeled next to Luffy, whispering to him. It was a quiet moment before Luffy gave a loud, Sabo quickly shushing the boy. Luffy turned to Ace with wide eyes as he had taken in the new information before dashing towards Ace suddenly. Luffy squeezed his leg, tears brimming in his eyes. I'm sorry, Ace. I'm sorry. I didn't know that you didn't want to hurt us. Ace really loves us. Please don't be mad. Ace's heart ached as he heard his little brother cry. He couldn't stand it when Luffy cried, especially when it was because of him. He reached down, running his fingers through the black hair. It's okay, Luffy. I'm not mad. Really? Luffy sniffled. Ace smiled at him, holding him tightly. I really want to do it, Ace. Ace won't hurt me or Sabo because I know you love us. I want to do this, so we're never alone. Being alone hurts. You really want this? Ace asked again, just to be sure. Luffy gave a quick nod. I want this. I want to be with Ace and Sabo forever. Fine, Ace mumbled, causing Luffy's mood to instantly brighten as he cheered. Luffy running around until he clung to Sabo telling the good news, while Sabo tried to calm him down. You're really alright with this? Sabo asked. Yeah, can't say no after hearing all that. Sabo knew exactly what he meant. Don't worry, I know you won't hurt me. And Luffy's right, that's if the bond is true. It would be nice to feel closer. It will work, Luffy exclaimed. The older brothers just couldn't figure out why Luffy was so sure. Maybe it was his instinct. So we all exchange blood through biting each other, that's it. Ace asked Sabo. He sat back on the floor, legs stretched as he leaned back on his hands. Sabo followed but crossed his legs instead. He opened the book to show him the picture Luffy had seen earlier. Basically, yes, the book states that both dragons bite each other on the neck, though it doesn't mention about it happening at the same time or individually. So we'll have to decide on that, Sabo explained. Dragons. Wait a minute, what about humans? Won't there be side effects? Ace worried for his kin. Doesn't say, Sabo shrugged. Not to mention my teeth aren't as sharp as yours. It'll hurt a bit more, he pointed to his teeth. Great, Ace grumbled, rubbing his neck. You sure you want to do this, Luffy? Luffy nodded repeatedly, getting excited by each passing second. It'll be fine, Luffy reassured them. So how do you want to do this? We can take it in turns or do it together and swap, Sabo asked, snapping the book closed. Together. Let's do it together. The youngest boy cheered. Okay then. Luffy sit on Ace's lap facing him. Luffy didn't hesitate as he followed the instructions. Sabo shuffled in front Ace, Luffy sandwiched between them. Ready. A nod was all they gave before sinking their teeth in each other's left shoulders. Sabo bit Luffy, who bit into Ace, and Ace leaned over Luffy to bite into Sabo. Pain tore in each bite, screaming to stop. But none of them pulled away, determined to fight through it until it was just an ache. The taste of copper filled their mouths and blood flowed down their throats. Luffy was the first to stop after few gulps, lapping at the wound. Ace and Sabo followed soon after. You okay, Lu? Ace embraced the little body. Luffy gave in, nodding as his brother looked over him, concerned. Alright Lu, you need to turn around, the third brother instructed. Luffy was able to turn with some delicate handling from the other two, and he was now facing Sabo. Like before, Luffy provided a short nod just before they bit onto skin a second time, the same place as the first. After removing their lips and lapping at the wound, they were able to see what they had done. Luffy gleamed at the two as he inspected the bites on his brother's shoulders that would no doubt mark their skin for the rest of their lives. The other two looked at his with fondness, pride and delight expressed through their eyes. It was later that night, as they were nestled together, sleeping with some bandages placed on their skin, when Luffy felt tender warmth forming on his left shoulder, spreading through his body. That night Luffy felt closer to his brothers than ever. It would be a few years that a horrifying event will happen, an event that will cause the three brothers to feel so much pain and loss through each mark they hold on their shoulders. End. Chapter 2, Torn Apart. Stay away. The black-suited men ignored Luffy's yells, getting closer with each step. Luffy's body trembled in fright but continued to stand over Ace's bloody body protectively in his dragon form. No, not again, I won't let you take my kin away from me. A man lunged towards them. Luffy swiftly whipped him away with his tail. Get moving, I want that dragon, it must be captured alive. A voice yelled out, causing more men to appear. Leave us alone, he roared, spreading out his black wings as a threatening display. Refusing to move away from his kin, Luffy continued to fight the men using everything he had, whipping his tail, striking with his talons and tearing skin with his teeth. Somehow they had managed to completely surround him, noting that they kept out of his striking range. But they were wrong. Luffy's head snapped forward, his neck stretching due to his devil fruit. He bit into the man, making him drop his gun and screech. Luffy was about to release the torn flesh until he felt multiple hands grabbing his long neck, refusing to let go. Panic settled inside Luffy as they pinned him down, his body struggling at the new weight jumping on him, and he tried to throw them off. It was useless as the weight became overwhelming and his whole form was held down by at least 20 soldiers. Feeling the cold chains wrapping around him, his movements became weak, all energy draining from his body. The bodies gradually removed themselves once the chains were fully on. Tears fell down his scaled face as he sighted Ace a few feet away, peacefully slumbering. Damn, I'm too weak. I can't save anyone. He whined through the binds. My family. I've lost everything. Take it to my ship. A painful cry vibrated from Luffy's chest as he watched his kin become distant. Luffy was dragged away, the darkness swallowing him. Ah! A scream echoed, jolting the sleeping boy off the floor. Luffy panted erratically, observing the familiar cage. Once recognizing his surroundings, the fear faded, leaving him hollow and numb, hugging his skinny arms around his knees, protecting himself from the harsh reality. He wept silently, burying his head while the memory haunted him. Pain was all he remembered from it. It had hurt so much watching his kin die in front of him, even more so as he had felt tearing burn in his shoulder, burn of them dying and being dragged away from his family. So traumatizing that it haunted his dreams ever since, returning with a numb hollowness each time he woke. His brothers were gone. They died right in front of him. He missed them so much, missed the days they hunted together, training each day. He even missed Ace's scolding. He didn't like the dark silence that surrounded him. It was lonely. It hurt so much. Suddenly, a familiar sensation creeped up beneath his skin. Luffy raised his head, covering the marks on his shoulders, sensing the mixed feelings that flowed from them. Sorry for waking you. It was just another nightmare, he smiled sadly. It had been a shock when he felt the emotions running through his skin for the first time since he was taken. But Luffy was relieved that he was still able to feel his brothers even when they were gone, keeping him sane this whole time. His tiny fingers brushed over each bite, the worry slowly ebbing away but not completely disappearing. It felt comforting to have his brothers there. Luffy was pulled from his thoughts with a loud slam. Not needing to look up, he knew that 4 knights were approaching. As usual, 2 held poles as tall as themselves with loops at the end, the 3rd holding multiple straps. The 4th knight, a spear in hand, led the way, stopping at Luffy's cage. The leader unlocked the door, entering first. Luffy's eyed them as soon as they all stepped in. The leader drew in closer, to which he gave a snarl, his sharp teeth on show. Instantly, the knight stood in a defensive position. Behave, slave, he said, pointing his spear at Luffy. 2 knights moved quickly, using their poles to loop 2 ropes around his neck, and Luffy gasped at the tightness. His efforts seemed to fade, the air cut away from his body. Only when he collapsed to the floor did the ropes loosen enough to breathe. Change, the knight pressed the spear's tip to Luffy's side. He twitched at the cut, growling once more before adjusting to his hands and knees. Doing as commanded, his body started to change. As he transformed, pale skin turned into black hardened scales across his whole body. His feet and hands grew sharp claws that scratched into the metal floor. Then, a whip-like tail, 3 times longer than his body, stretched from his body and curled around the small prison. Now a black dragon, slightly bigger than a human, stood between the knights. Satisfied, the leader signaled to the last knight with the straps. The said man rushed, placing the multiple straps along Luffy's body. Luffy fought more, feeling the metal and straps wrapping around his face. He whined, trying to scratch off the muzzle, not liking how constricting it all was. They vanished only to return with a saddle. Luffy spied the object with a hiss, increasing the noise as he felt the familiar leather and cushion pressing down on his back. Finally done, the knights guided him forcefully out of his cage and onto the deck of a large ship. I see my beast has been prepared. A snobbish voice spoke. Yes, my lord. It is saddled and ready as you have ordered. A tall, well-dressed man bowed to his master. Raising himself, he then gestured to the various sullen women that were chained and lined up nearby. My lord, which wives shall be accompanying you on your outing? His Highness didn't spare them a glance, instead just fanned his hand. Well, bring wives 9 to 12, he said, walking towards Luffy. Very well, my lord. The man bowed once more before directing knights to retrieve the said wives. The 4 women followed without question as they were collected and pulled near the black dragon, though some displayed worried looks at being close to the creature. Luffy ignored them, becoming used to such reactions. When his chain was tugged by a knight, he reluctantly lowered his body as his so-called master stood expectantly next to him. Lower. You're annoying. Stupid beast, can't understand a simple order. He kicked at Luffy with his white heel. Luffy growled at the action, to which the man stepped back, cautious yet sneering. How dare you growl back at me? The man raised his cane as a signal, and suddenly a strap was tightening around his neck, making him choke. Reluctantly he gave in and lay onto the deck, watching his master smirk in triumph, approaching him again. Inwardly, Luffy laughed as he saw the fat man constantly struggle to climb onto the saddle, ordering for assistant. Luffy swiftly became annoyed, feeling the bigger weight climbing onto him, so he faced away. He looked around to distract himself of the annoyance, and for the first time after walking onto deck, Luffy took in his surroundings. His eyes sparkled at humongous stripped trees, but the most interesting thing were the numerous bubbles floating everywhere. Then pain erupted at his side, with the loud order. Move. Sabo gripped his side from the abrupt pain, a hiss passing his lips. Before he began to carefully massage the muscle, Hearing similar groans, he checked the Raven man sitting on the opposite side of the table. Of course Ace was feeling the same discomfort as him. Ace growled, rubbing the stinging away from his ribs. He then looked away from his own skin, giving Sabo a glance then cutting it off as he bowed the orange hat, clicking his tongue. Sabo persisted with worry though, observing the way Ace secretly bit his inner lip and how his arms gradually tensed. He focused back to the drink that sat with him. He thumbed the tankard as his mind began to drift. Really, he wasn't that surprised with Ace's bad mood and he could hardly blame him. It had been a stressful day walking around the place, all the while constantly being surrounded by people. The crowds didn't bother him too much but he knew Ace was having a tough time, considering the part he never liked humans very much. Of course with the odd exception. It had been a year since the horrid day, since Luffy was stolen from them, leaving him and Ace to die. They'd decided instantly to chase after their brother once they found out but since then Ace had changed. Sabo noticed the way the dislike of humans had grown to hate, how he was constantly on guard around them. They had scars, some deeper than others. Sabo gently trailed his fingers over the burns that covered the left side of his face, trailing downwards until reaching the bond mark. He caressed it tenderly, wondering if his little brother could feel the comforting touch. Then, Ace mumbled under his breath. Huh. Sabo returned attention back to Ace. The pain. It was stronger than usual. Ace slouched in his seat. Sabo didn't miss the way his hand clenched around his tankard. Sabo couldn't see his eyes due to the cowboy but he didn't have to, knowing that Ace was probably watching the straw hat that sat on his lap. I guess it means that we're getting closer. Sabo said. Ace hummed. Ace always had the hat with him. Sabo had insisted that it would be best that Ace looked after it and ever since, Ace never let it out of his sight. If it wasn't hanging from his back, it was in his lap as he fidgeted with the rim, just like he was doing right now. It had taken a year of traveling the Grand Line, fighting enemies while searching for any hint of Luffy, to lead them here, Sabayati Archipelago, the last island before crossing over to the New World. Also known for its large slave trade. Just thinking about it made Sabo want to puke, maybe even burn the whole island to the ground. Though, if they wanted to find Luffy then their best bet was here, if his gathered information was anything to go by. Many types of people, including slaves, had come through Sabayati for many reasons, and so Sabo had hoped that the news of someone owning a dragon would be easy to come by. But that hadn't been the case. It had been a few days since they had arrived. The two captains had split from the crew as soon as they had arrived, telling them to enjoy themselves while the ship was being coated. Alone, Sabo and Ace were able to explore easily, going to every possible place they could find during their entire stay. At one point they had seen the amusement park and Ace talked about how Luffy would go crazy for the place, probably dragging them both onto every ride he thought would make them queasy. In the end they found themselves empty-handed. How the hell the largest slave trading island hadn't had a single gossip of a black dragon was beyond him. Now, they were sat in a bar scattered with pirates. Sabo sighed, pulling a scroll from his blue jacket. He spread the sheet out onto the bar table, showing a map of the island and its many sections. There are still a couple of slave markets I can check, he said, tapping his fingers over the map. Ace raised his head presenting Sabo a suspicious stare. You, don't you mean us? Damn, Sabo cursed. He was hoping his idiot brother wouldn't pick up on it. I can't really take you if you're going to make a scene, the blonde made his point. Hey, that guy deserved it. How dare he try to sell us a guy in a dragon costume? He's lucky he's still alive. Ace banged a fist atop of the table. And the guy before that? Sabo raised a brow, crossing his arms. He was talking a load of shit. Laughing at us, saying dragons weren't real. Ace was baring his teeth now. Sabo continued, not intimidated the slightest. What about the rest? Okay, they all deserved it. Why should it matter? It's not like anyone's going to be upset about me attacking a load of slave traders. Ace, I'm not saying they didn't deserve it. But this is probably why you need to take a break. Ace's mouth opened. And don't say you don't, Ace. He paused. You're hurting, we both are, but I can see that you're worse off. I've been watching. You haven't eaten properly and you haven't slept in days. I'm actually starting to miss your narcolepsy attacks. Sabo smirked as Ace scowled at that last sentence. I just can't. Not now when I can feel how strong his pain is. A sorrowful expression crossed his face with a small forceful smile. In a way I'm relieved. Not just because I can share his pain, but it reminds me that he is still alive. That he's still waiting for us. Of course Sabo knew what his older brother meant. Throughout their whole journey they could feel each other through the dragon bond, even if it was a little. They could feel the suffering that their smallest brother was going through. At first they felt relieved that they could still feel the bond, but at the same time it would anger them greatly, the thought of someone even harming their hatchling. Ace would even blow out at points, saying how useless he felt, tearing down anything nearby. Thankfully Sabo would be there to calm the Raven down. Though, it got a lot worse when they didn't sense anything from Luffy in a while, stressing Sabo at these times. Sabo didn't like to think about how out of hand they both had previously gotten, causing the Marines to raise their bounties once again. And if he's close I want to be there for him. I want to hug and tell him I'm sorry. Not just for failing him, letting them take him, but for after. Because of me we can never go back. Sabo slammed his hands onto the table, nearly jumping Ace out of his seat. A couple of other costumers glanced their way, annoyed. It took a moment for Sabo to make sure no eyes were directed at them. Only then he rose his own, focusing them on Ace from under the brim of his top hat. The recipient didn't dare turn away. Ace, what happened wasn't your fault. Not yours, mine or even Luffy's. And what you did to Goa, you weren't, if anything they had set themselves up for it. Sabo leaned over the table, pinching both of Ace's freckled cheeks. If you want to blame something then it's that we weren't strong enough. Isn't that what we've been doing this past year? Becoming stronger, much stronger so that none of us would be torn from each other again. Alright, I'm sorry. Sabo's gloved hand released the cheek. Tisk, did you have to pinch my face? It's really annoying and it hurts, Ace said, soothing the red skin. Next time I'll go for the ears. Sabo smiled innocently but under that mask was a little pinching demon. Brighten up a bit and don't worry about our little hatchling so much. He'll be so happy to see us. Sabo quickly changed to a better topic. He'll be more jealous that we became pirates before him. Ace replied, taking a few gulps from his tankard. It would have happened anyway. We are 9 years older than him. We'll make it up to him and take him to every island he wants. I heard there are lots of food islands in the New World. Ace released a small laugh. I could just imagine him trying to eat a whole island and still complain he's hungry. Sabo stifled his own laughter under his hand. Now, how about I order us some food? Sabo got up, deciding that he was getting hungry at the mention of food. He didn't have to wait for his brother's reply as Ace's stomach growled, causing the freckled lad to redden. He crossed to the food bar, weaving between the chairs and tables. Once reaching the counter he called the barkeep who motioned that he would need to wait. Resting his head in his palm, he leaned onto the bar as he waited. Closing his eyes, he focused on the surrounding people, from the barkeep's orders to the constant chatter. Can you believe it? A drunken voice spoke. It must be a joke, no way it's true. No it is. I heard it from my mate. They're putting it up for auction today. They'll certainly sell it for an extortionate price. Well, what do you expect for a rare slave? Those nobles will spend so much on it and still have tons left over. His interest piquing, Sabo observed the 3 drunken men sitting at the bar not far from him. Man, I wish we had that kind of money. If we had that money we wouldn't be pirates, one said, causing the others to laugh loudly, unaware of Sabo approaching behind them. He smiled down politely, tricking the souls before him. Excuse me gentlemen, I couldn't help overhearing you. Could you tell me more about this auction? A while had passed since Sabo had left him. During that time, he had stared off into oblivion, his fingers playing with the red material wrapped around the straw hat. Don't worry Lou, we're coming. When he looked up he watched Sabo pacing quickly towards their table. You alright? Where's the food? He questioned with raised brow. He became more intrigued as Sabo collected up the map from the table. I'm fine, said Sabo, putting the map away. Sabo, he called, telling his brother he knew better. The said blonde bit his lip as if he was deciding on something. Look, I might have a lead, but I'm only taking you if you promise to listen and do as I say. You have to stay calm. Lead. Ace didn't have to question it since it was Sabo. Fine, Ace, I mean it. This place will be crowded with people. The information made Ace cringe, thinking how he would be stuffed with a load of humans. But he had to do it, he wouldn't let his brothers down. Ace stood, placing the straw hat onto his back, his face full of determination once more. I promise. Now let's go find our brother, said Ace, finally walking out of the bar, Sabo beside him. It took them about half an hour walking to arrive at their destination. As they walked through the many mangroves that surrounded them, Sabo had told him some of the information he had just found out. There was an auction house where all the best slaves were taken to and there was a rare slave that would be put up for sale today. But there was a small catch. The reason the best slaves were sold there was that the house was full of nobles. Like Sabo warned, the human shop of Grove 1 was packed with humans, full of nobles with the odd few pirates looking to possibly add a member or two. Ace could barely stand the stench of rich perfumes and the other trashy smells these people gave off. He turned to Sabo, who was covering his nose. Ace grabbed the gloved hand lightly, pulling it down from the other's face. Sabo sent him a questioning glare. Your claws are out, he whispered. Sabo inspected his hand, now displaying razor-sharp nails cutting the glove's fingertips. Sabo groaned, focusing his claws to return. He removed the gloves, stuffing them into his pocket as he complained about now needing a new pair. Just slightly uncomfortable, Sabo reasoned. Ace gave an understanding nod, sharing his brother's emotions. He was glad he wasn't the only one. It was most likely why they had chosen to sit in the far back, so they could be as far away from the irritating humans but still be able to see the stage clearly. His view was quickly blocked by a scrap of paper. He took it curiously from the offering hand of his kin, giving it his attention. His brows furrowed as he read the disgusting words. Humans, belly 500,000 plus. Dwarves, belly 700,000 plus. Mink tribe, belly 700,000 plus. Long-arm tribe, belly 700,000 plus. Longleg tribe, belly 700,000 plus. Snakeneck tribe, belly 700,000 plus. Fishmen, belly 1 million plus. Giants, male giants, belly 50 million plus. Female giants, belly 10 million plus. Merfolk, unparted female, belly 70 million plus. Male, belly 1 million plus. Parted female, belly 10 million plus. Devil fruit users, market price. What's this? A price list and also, my lead. The important slave that's up today is not on the list. It's not much but, it's great, Sabo, Ace whispered with a hopeful expression. Not a minute later that the lights began to dim, leaving only the stage lit, calling for everyone's eyes. A man danced on with a long coat, starred sunglasses and a yellow, flowered top hat on. In Ace's opinion he was the weirdest funky-looking creature he'd probably seen. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the largest slave trading house of the All Blues. I am your host, the walking bazaar, Mr. Disco. Smoke and glitter exploded from the stage, causing the audience to cheer in excitement. Ace just sneered in his seat at the ridiculous display, that for the nobles it was just a show. The ugly man called for the first slave to be brought on while boasting about the chained human like a prize. It was places like these that reminded Ace how much he hated humans. It was revolting how they turned on their own kind and others for the ugliest of reasons. The auction continued, bringing on a different slave after another. They were at the 9th slave before one of the small stage helpers jogged up and whispered to the host. My apologies, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be taking a short break. The colorful man vanished from the stage, leaving his audience to wonder about the sudden interruption. He looked to Sabo, a questioning shrug in return. Moments later the entrance opened, and upon recognizing the white figures entering, eyes were cast down as to not make eye contact with the newcomers. Ace grit his teeth at them, eyes burning at the familiar clothing. 2 men strolled in, both wearing a large white coat with bubble helmet and hair pointing upward as if it had just been sucked by a vacuum dial. Celestial dragons. Everyone knew of their existence, the self-proclaimed gods descendants of this world. What a load of bullshit. His instincts were screaming at him to rip the men where they stood. It was then that Sabo griped his arm, giving him the, "Don't do anything stupid, look." The whole room was silent except for the continuous tapping as the host reappeared by the side of the Celestials in a slight bow, guiding them to their seats. Ace was relieved that he could hardly scent anything clearly through the mess of smells. It spared him having the honor of getting a sniff of the world nobles. As soon as the Celestials were seated they waved the host off. Mr. Disco quickly went back to the stage, not wanting to upset the scary nobles. Immediately, he returned to his performance with a large smile. Thank you for being patient, ladies and gentlemen. We'll now be continuing the wonderful show with number 9. The show continued as if nothing had happened. From then time seemed to drag on, tapping his boot as he waited for the important slave to make its appearance. His irritation grows with each slave being sold to new masters. At one point a chained fishman had been dragged on stage, the bid growing higher until one of the Celestials bids. Of course, no one dared to outbid him. Finally, my wonderful audience, Mr. Disco spun to center of the stage, we have one final slave today. But not just any slave. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I have saved the best for last. Drums thundered, bringing the audience to the edge of their seats. Even Ace leant closer with hopeful eyes. A rare slave, just for you. With a click of the host's fingers, the curtains parted and Ace's eyes widened, focusing on the revealed figure. 3. Death sentence. It wasn't him, it wasn't Luffy. That was the first thing that the brothers thought, many emotions running between them. Frustration, sadness, as it turned out to be another dead end at finding Luffy, but also shock and anger as they observed the newly revealed slave. Are they crazy bringing that thing here? They're asking for their own deaths. Ace internally yelled. It was the first time seeing one for him, not that he was eager to meet one, knowing from the books that Sabo used to read to them. But there was no mistake, looking at the creature. The figure was slightly smaller than a giant and wrapped in various chains, clanging as it tugged at each one. No one took their eyes off the creature, scanning the powerful muscles that demonstrated the strength it possessed. From a distance anyone could mistake it as a giant if not for the unusual facial features, 2 tusk-like teeth protruding from the mouth and one large eye. They had brought in a goddamn cyclops, of all things. Number 19 is a cyclops standing at 10 meters but it's strong as any giant. The item is excellent for manual labor, a lethal fighter and collection piece. Mr. Disco bragged. We'll start the bidding on this brilliant cyclops at 100 million berries. The bidding began quickly. A bidder followed by another, shooting their hands as they called a higher price. Idiots have no clue what they're really buying, Ace heard his brother say, but they weren't going to stop them, noting the cyclops sniffing the air with drool dripping down its jaw. We better get out of here, Sabo motioned to the entrance. Ace nodded, both feeling each other's nervousness. They carefully moved out of their seats to not draw any attention but as they were making their way up the stairs they heard the celestial dragon yell. 600 million berries. The expensive amount caused everyone to be outbided. Sold to St. Clarington, Mr. Disco announced, slamming his mallet onto the podium. Clarington, what are you doing buying such a dull beast? The other celestial asked. I was thinking of how interesting it would be to pit that creature with my dragon. Let's see which fares better. Ace bolted around suddenly, his whole attention directed at the celestial dragons. His body vibrated. No way did he imagine it. No way could he have missed those words pouring out of the horrid noble's mouth. His eyes filled with rage as he processed the words. This guy had a dragon. Sabo heard the words too, but he kept his composure to not give away the hate he was holding. On the other hand, Ace wasn't doing so well. He didn't need the bond to know that Ace was pissed, walking back further into auction hall. However, he didn't try to stop the raven. Instead, Sabo sidestepped away, giving him plenty of space. It was his way of giving the go ahead as Ace passed him. Gasps and whispers slowly spread, the audience just noticing the dangerous rookie, who was approaching behind the celestial. Drums rumbled in Ace's ears, drowning out his surroundings, except for the prey lying in front of him, getting closer and closer. However, sea and leaves filled his scenes and stunned him mid-step. It smelled wonderful, as if he was back home, sitting on the cliff with his brothers. It was calming and it filled Ace with a sense of peace, taking the familiar scent. Lou, a golden-wide smile flashed in his mind. It was so powerful it felt as if he was being hit by one of Luffy's rocket attacks, winding him completely, yet in a good way. But the trance was broken when he saw where it was coming from, pinpointing the white-dressed noble. Confusion hit him until he connected the dots. There was only one reason why Luffy's smell was on this human. How dare this man touch his kin, to even mention harming his hatchling? The happy emotions reverted back to anger, but now it was fueled with a goal. To rip this piece of shit to pieces. What did you just say? He gritted out with demonic eyes. The noble glanced over his shoulder, discovering the shadowed figure looming over him. A spark of fear passed through Clarington before he became infuriated. Damn vermin, you dare to look at, the celestial was cut off. Ace had hit through the glass and suspended the human with his throat tight between his fingers. The human wheezed, clasping Ace's wrist as he struggled to breath. Everyone else in room became shaken and jaws hung at what they had just witnessed, their minds completely stunned. He just attacked a celestial D-dragon, a voice stuttered. It was as if it had broken all the audience out of a trance because the next thing was utter chaos. Everyone screamed out in horror. He's killed us all. Run for your lives. They'll punish us. Hurry before an admiral shows up. The crowd dispersed in a frenzy, every person swarming to every possible exit, shoving everything in their way and trampling over others. It was another reason why Ace hated the humans. They cared about nothing but themselves. Now tell me, what were you saying about a dragon? Ace raised his eyes, meeting his prey's own. That dragon wouldn't happen to be a small boy with black hair, would it? Clarington's eyes widened at the question, looking back with new fear. You're This is outrageous, touching the descendants of gods. I'll dispose of you myself. The second celestial pulled out a gun aiming at Ace's bare back. You annoying pest. Die, now. Shots rang through the room as the man pulled the trigger. Pop, 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 pop. Luffy watched the bubbles burst from where he sat. It was just moments ago that his so-called master and companion, along with the rest, had disappeared into the large building with a sign showing, human, leaving Luffy leashed at the entrance, with the usual comment that animals should wait for their masters outside. Not that Luffy minded too much. Not eager to go with the two nobles, instead he rather enjoyed the outside, watching the flying balls. He hadn't been able to take his eyes off them since he got on the island, fascinated by the mystery bubbles that seemed to come from the ground. However, he whined in annoyance at being unable to play with them. He thought he could possibly try to climb and bounce on one, see how high it would take him. From the corner of his eye he spotted one blowing up close by and he crouched in position, stalking his prey as it grew bigger. Once it left the grass, he pounced toward it but ended up flat on his back. Luffy groaned, opening his eyes to stare up at the unharmed bubble above, mocking him. He snarled at it before rolling back onto his belly, reaching again. But it was no use as it continued to drift higher away from the claws. Luffy whined at his failure before turning a blameful look over his shoulder at the pinned-down chain. It didn't deter Luffy though, instead he continued to entertain himself, jumping at bubbles nearby. At one point he took advantage of the soapy ground and started to slide and roll in it. Distracted, he didn't notice someone approaching the entrance. The new voice startled Luffy, who got into a defensive stance. Facing the new character, standing a distance away, he found that it was a man. A very old man, judging by his appearance. He had long, white hair, trimmed, stripped beard that bushed together at the bottom, and he wore a white cap. Not only that, the stranger gave off the smell that Luffy was familiar with, from when he spent time with Shanks at the bar. Just like Shanks, this man was a drinker. Luffy's guess was proven when the man grasped a small flask before taking a few gulps. Seems like the auction has already started. And here I was planning to sell myself as a slave so I could steal some money. He smirked, scratching the back of his head. Well, that's impossible now. Guess I'll have to pickpocket some nobles. He laughed loudly. Oh, well, what do we have here? Gray Eyes spied the black dragon near the entrance, and advanced toward it, wanting to get a closer look. When the elder became too close for comfort, Luffy growled in warning and snapped his jaw threateningly. The recipient halted and he crouched down, presenting Luffy with a drunken smile. It's been a long time since I've seen a dragon. Not seen a hatchling before though. Let me guess, you're 10, no, too small. 8. The man jerked back quickly, avoiding the swish of a long tail, as if expecting the attack. Oh, feisty hatchling, aren't you? He commented, figuring he was close to the mark. So, what's a little guy like you doing here? A frown formed then, as he noticed the rest of the dragon's form. Luffy felt uncomfortable as the stranger's eyes seemed to look at him, not sure why. It was then that his mark stressed intense feelings. Luffy thought that his brothers were probably nervous, even suspicious of the stranger, thinking how the two kin would warn him to be careful and scold him when he didn't listen. The stranger turned attention to the chain, then back at Luffy again. Ah, I get it, the carefree smile returned, his eyes trained on Luffy. How about we get those heavy things off you? Luffy ceased his growling and tilted his head instead, confused at why the human would want to help him. He stared at the stranger as if looking at his soul. Instinctively Luffy decided the man to be a good person and responded with a brief nod. Ace's mark flared, screaming at Luffy that he was too trusting. It's okay, Ace. We can trust him, Luffy whined. The stranger raised a brow at the last noise curiously but brushed it off. At least he had got an answer. Honestly, he was expecting to be ignored as many slaves seemed to do. He was glad to see that the hatchling still had spirit. Luffy allowed the elderly human to come closer until he kneeled beside him. He tensed when he saw the man present a knife from his clothing, but Luffy didn't make a sound, granting the blade to draw closer. He wouldn't doubt the other's words. Afterwards, the straps were sliced away, even the muzzle. Feeling the metal slip off his scaly face, Luffy released a sound akin to a purr. It was amazing, stretching and shaking his body free of the removed weight. He leapt to the man, nudging his head into his shoulder gratefully. The man chuckled at the dragon's reaction. Don't thank me yet. A wrinkled hand patted Luffy's head. He receded back slightly, palm moving so to raise Luffy's head. Now for the tricky bit, he said, pointing to the collar still hanging around Luffy's neck. This is going to make a loud noise so when it's off you'll have to hurry, he warned. Luffy answered with a snort, causing the man to laugh hard. Is that so? Well then, he grinned, reaching out and tapping the collar, causing it to start ticking. Tick, 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 tick. Suddenly, there were two explosions. Opening his eyes, Luffy looked down, finding his collar was gone. He looked around, wondering where the other threw it, only to see it falling out of a cloud of smoke and clanging to the ground. Oh, looks like someone has started their own fun. Guess we'll have to move faster, the older man said as he raised his head. Luffy directed his toward the auction house, where the other was staring. Luffy heard the panicked cries from inside, as well as multiple shots, but what put him on edge was the hot smell of fire. You better hurry kid, looks like something interesting happened and it won't be long till the Marines are here. The elder stood up, but Luffy shook his head, and then bit on the white cape. He tugged, urging his new friend to run. Sorry, but I can't go with you, he said stroking Luffy's head, who groaned at the touch and nipped at the hand. Ha ha ha, don't worry little one, I can take care of myself. I'm not just some old man. Crossing both arms, he held himself proudly. Now, use that nose of yours and head to the coast. You'll find plenty of ships there to sneak on, though I suggest getting some clothes on before changing. Don't want to see a little child running around naked. Luffy hesitated, staring worriedly up at him. Finally, he ran, believing that his friend would be safe, sprinting away under and over the many mangrove roots. The elder man watched the small figure dash becoming even smaller. Drinking from his flask, he lifted his head looking to the distance where the dragon vanished. Such a shame we had to meet like this. But I'll wait till we meet again, Monkey D. Luffy. He smirked. Shots sounded through the auction hall. The bullets cut into the air like a knife, full speed until stabbing into flesh. Ace felt the bullets passing through his body but there was no pain, just 3 flaming holes appearing on his torso. The bullets continued, instead hitting the man that Ace was holding, blood staining the white coat as it flowed out and down the body. Ace grit his teeth in irritation, listening to faint heartbeats struggling from his hostage. Devil fruit. The celestial dragon stuttered, backing away, petrified. As Ace dropped the now dead noble to the floor, he completely turned to his shooter. Ace growled, annoyed that his prey had gone and died on him, glaring at the foolish noble. Saint stay away, do you know who I am? He shot again, right through the raven's head. But Ace's headless body still strutted forward, the flames gathering once more, revealing Ace's head, unharmed. You shouldn't have done that, a calm voice appeared from behind the noble. Sabo had snuck up, kicking the noble's feet from under him and pining his prey down under his foot. He felt the weaker tremble under his boot when he pointed the end of his staff threateningly. No way was he going to let this man escape, not only for taking Luffy but for trying to hurt his kin. Ace, you go ahead. No way am I leaving you, Ace snapped, fire flaring up his arms. Ace, get your head out of the fire and listen, Sabo scolded the other. We don't have a lot of time, the Marines will be here soon along with an admiral. So go ahead and find Lu, he can't be far. Ace didn't move, hesitant to separate from his brethren, always feeling uneasy. Yet, he knew Sabo was right. After all, he was the smarter of them, not that he'd admit that to him. But Ace was stronger and he needed to find Lu and protect him. Don't worry, I'll be right behind you, Sabo said and gave him a reassuring smile. You better. Ace retreated, running toward the exit. The knights blocked his path, quickly trying to stop him from escaping. But as he raised an ignited fist, calling out, Heiken, a blast of fire exploded forward, clearing the way, and he sprinted past the burnt figures. You better come back or I'll kill you myself. Sabo huffed, knowing that Ace was going to complain later. Hopefully his sulking wouldn't last long once they got Luffy back. He observed the room, counting about 20 guards left. Well, gentlemen, are you just going to stand there? Sabo mocked them, at which they ran at him. Sabo leapt up, dodging the thrusting spear, next landing on it with his and spinning his legs, sending roundhouse kicks, knocking 7 men back. He continued the fight, hitting each enemy down easily, and before long he had whacked another 11 guards unconscious. You useless fools, protect me. The Celestial demanded. 2 guards stood defensively beside him, trying to escort the man to safety. I can't allow that. Sabo strolled up the stairs as he twirled the staff at his side, menacing shadow shrouding him. The guards lunged at him, but he somersaulted over their heads and swiftly knocked them out. Sabo looked down at the laying figures spread out across the room, then to the stage with calculating eyes. The Cyclops had grown restless, most likely from the intense smell of blood, pulling further at his chains. Some of the restraints were giving way to the mindless beast. Scuffling was heard and Sabo refocused at the main task at hand. Polite but evil smile materialized as Sabo sighted his main prey crawling away. Why are you leaving, Mr. High Noble? I thought you loved to watch fights, Sabo spoke as he shadowed over the man. You vermin, you'll pay dearly for harming us. I won't let you live. I'll send every soldier, they will hunt you too till you're dead. The man yelled desperately as if expecting his words to be intimidating. Is that so? Sabo crouched down, bowing his hat to shadow his eyes. Then I really can't grant you to leave, can I? He asked, grabbing the man's ankle and dragging him downwards. What are you doing? Release me. Mr. Noble, do you know why Cyclops are so dangerous? Sabo climbed onto the stage with the man in hand. Of course they're well known for their strength despite their size. However, what makes them so beastly is their small minds and hunger. So basically they are always thinking about food. It kind of reminds me of a certain someone, they won't stop if something comes between their food. They were now both in front of the fierce mythical creature. Sabo lifted and held the noble before him. The man shook in fright as he was faced with the large drooling figure, chains rattling as they loosened. Ever wondered what they eat? Sabo whispered. Humans, he answered for the noble. The chains fell to the stage as the Cyclops released a tremendous roar, free of its restraints. Sniffing around, it crouched down onto its hands, sensing the 2 figures near it. You're insane, it'll kill us both. Maybe so, but Cyclops rely a lot on smell. Sabo held strong against his hostage's struggles. But I have a hunch that I'm in no immediate danger, Sabo stated. The Cyclops stared right at the 2, Sabo taking this as his key to separate himself from the celestial dragon. He focused next and his smooth skin became rough yellow scale. His talons grew at his fingertips and finally his teeth became jagged. He stood motionless as the Cyclops sniffed at the 2, felt as if everything went still. Sabo wasn't completely sure that his idea would work, becoming quite nervous as the large beast grunted. If it didn't, he'd have to change tactic. It would be unnecessarily troublesome to fight the Cyclops. The Cyclops roared abruptly, causing saliva to fly everywhere, before snatching the noble up and stuffing the human into its mouth, its jaw crunching down as blood splattered and dribbled down its mouth. Sabo released his breath, not realizing that he was holding it, before walking away. He listened to the dying screams, as well as the sound of grinding bones, as he retreated calmly to the door. Better go find Ace, not doubt he's causing trouble. Wonder if he found Luffy, he thought to himself. Ace sprinted up the long corridor. He became frustrated as he struggled to capture Luffy's scent. If only I could have beaten that stupid Celestial into telling me. Damn it. Closing in at the entrance, he grasped the smell of the sea. Lu, we're here, he smirked. Following the smell eagerly, he ran through the entrance. Shit, he cursed, seeing the Marines approaching in the distance. He needed to hurry fast. He sniffed the air, searching for his kin once more. Clang. Looking down, Ace spotted something metal with a load of straps by his feet. Picking it up, he gave it a whiff and it smelt like Luffy. He inspected the metal curiously before he recognized what it was. A muzzle. They used a muzzle, the words echoed in his mind. His poor little Luffy was muzzled like a rabid dog. In that moment, the surrounding Marines saw an unforgiving monster, something that would haunt their nights forever. The air was thick with fear, the whole island was in panic as he continued to dash through the large mangroves. Luffy panted as his tiny legs continued to dash past the large mangroves surrounding him. There was no end of them. His legs were aching and he was tired, but he wouldn't stop, he refused to. I won't let them get me. I won't. I don't want to go back there. These thoughts motivated him as he sprinted, searching for the coast. It was difficult with the chaos happening on the island, nearly everyone running around leaving layers of smells. What was harder, though, was trying to stay out of sight. He already had a few close calls with some marines, as they searched and gathered a few pirates. Luffy was getting really annoyed as he hid down a dark alleyway, ducking when a group of soldiers ran past. He scrunched his face, tired of all the noisy humans. If only there was another way. Sabo would know what to do, he thought, gazing at the bubbles going higher till they were no longer in sight. Luffy's mind drifted, the rusty gears working in his head, giving one of his rare thoughtful expressions. Pop! A bubble burst as Luffy grinned like a maniac. Leaving the dark alley, he crawled up to one of the large mangroves. This'll do, he thought, inspecting the tall, thick trunk. It was going to take too much effort scaling the giant tree and he really was low on time. Spotting the lowest branch, he stepped back and raised his tail and span it. Gomu Gomu no, lasso. The dragon's tail whipped out, stretching up at the impossible height, till it wrapped around the mangrove branch and pulled Luffy up. Luffy snickered that his idea had worked, hoping it made his brother proud. The view was a lot better in the high tree and the air was clear. He sniffed around, relieved that he could easily smell the familiar salty breeze. He moved quicker, now that he was so high, now that he didn't need to worry about being detected or concern himself with down below. Trailing along the branches, he leapt quickly from tree to tree, following the fresh scent. Honestly, Luffy enjoyed climbing the trees as it was something he did constantly back home in the forest. He crossed another branch but he halted, for what lay before him was an endless body of water. It sparkled and moved happily, as if welcoming him back. He cheered, though no one would be able to hear him due to the height. Briefly, he surveyed beneath, squinting. There were hordes of people flooding the docks. He could hear marines hollering at the crowd, advising them to remain calm, but no one listened, each person shoving at one another as they tried to get onto a ship of their own. Luffy hummed, thinking that he wouldn't like to be stuffed onto any of those ships. He looked to the other ships but was disappointed, recognizing them as marine ships. Instantly, he shook his head, not even considering jumping onto the blue ships. It was like asking to be caught again or worse. Suddenly, an image of a happy crazy old man flashed in his mind, which sent shivers down Luffy's body. Definitely not going on there, he thought seriously. He continued to climb the mangroves along the coast, inspecting other ships. They were the same as before, crowded or marine ships. Luffy was starting to get desperate. He might have to creep onto one of the packed ships in the end, though it would be hard to hide. Captain, we need to hurry. Luffy turned to the panicked voice, climbing closer as he noticed a large ship docked and concealed by some mangrove roots. Peering closer at the ship, Luffy's eyes gleamed. Woo, he thought, seeing the proud Jolly Roger hanging from the mast. It wasn't just any ship, it was a pirate ship. Luffy didn't even have to think as he scurried over the ship, hovering on a branch. Twirling his tail once more, he lowered himself quietly down till he reached the crow's nest, thankfully unnoticed as the pirates seemed to be preoccupied. He watched the men carry various crates onto the deck. Where are the rest of the men? A man in a feathered captain hat spoke. They got caught by the marines, someone replied. Damn it. The captain raised his sword, as the crew looked at him. Okay men, let's get out of here. Set sail, he ordered, followed by the crew cheering and immediately moving into action, not seeing the small stowaway creeping across the deck until he was at the back of the ship and out of sight. Sitting down among the shadows, he finally took notice of the soapy surface covering the deck. Nudging it, he found that it was similar to the soapy ground of the island. Why was it here? Slowly, he saw the soapy film rise, swallowing his clawed feet, and he raised his head away from the floor. What going on? The sticky stuff was now at his knees, slowly growing bigger. Ah, it's alive, he gasped. He bit into the gooey thing, but it was useless as his mouth just went through it, not to mention it tasted disgusting. It was now sliding up along his neck. I'm going to die. He inhaled deeply, blowing up his cheeks like a hamster. Luffy held his last breath, eyes tight shut. Plop, plop. Opening his eyes, he found the goo gone. Glancing around, he found the goo above him. It was even bigger. Watching as it grew so large that it covered the pirate ship in a large force field, Luffy gazed in amazement, wishing he had a ship that could do that. Hurry! Raise the anchor! The captain yelled from the front of the ship. To the new world. The crew roared once more as they scuttled around the deck. After a moment, Luffy found himself deep under the sea's surface, surrounded by the sea's living creatures. As the ship sank deeper in its bubble, Luffy saw weirder and larger creatures. Cool, look at all those fish. He drooled, imagining ways to eat the different fish that passed. He could probably put some salt on that giant eel, grill those smaller fish, oh, and have mayonnaise with that one. A puddle of saliva formed beneath him as he focused on a blob seeking. At this point his belly rumbled with a sad ache, reminding Luffy how hungry he really was. Maybe he could get a snack. To be continued. Chapter 4, Food Thief. It had been a while since the ship that Luffy had stowed away on had reached a strange underwater island. Of course Luffy had been shocked to find that an island was under the sea and how it was there in the first place, but he just decided that it was a mystery island surrounded by a large bubble. As soon as the ship had docked, Luffy had swiftly sneaked away and further into the strange island. Though it had been really difficult to hide from all the eyes that were floating about, he needed to be careful. As he explored the area, he realized that something was weird about the inhabitants. From an alleyway, he peered at the passerbys only to notice that their skins were unusual bright colors. They even had fins and webbing that humans didn't normally have. Quirking his head, he then saw someone with no legs but instead a long colorful stripped fish tail. Oh, they're mermaids. His eyes widened at the realization, thinking back to how his brothers would read various stories to him about them. But why do some of them have legs? Luffy pondered the question, till he was getting a headache. After observing the mermaids, he decided that he was getting bored of hiding in the shadows and wanted to eat something. Though looking at his scaly body, he noticed that he wasn't going to get anywhere with how he looked. Luffy didn't know but doubted that the humanoid fishes would like seeing a dragon, not to mention if he changed he'd be naked. Whining, he made the decision to find some clothes. Scurrying off, Luffy searched, weaving between the building until spotting the various clothes in front of him. Hanging by the side of the house was a line of washing. Luffy checked to see if anyone was nearby before dashing towards it, snatching various materials with his mouth, though careful so not to tear any. He rushes away unnoticed, back in the forest of coral. Running a short distance, he halted and dropped the stolen items down. He made sure that no one close in the surrounding area. Satisfied, he lets his body change from the dark dragon form to that of a small boy. His hair was still black as night, though covered in dirt just like the rest of him, and his skin was pale due to the softer skin of his not seeing light in over a year. Luffy crawled up from his knees, then patting the loose dirt off. Afterwards he approached the small pile of clothes. Reaching out, he plucked one up, observing it before discarding it as it was too small, thus continuing to rummage through the pile. Something caught his eye, a string-like clothing. Afterward he strapped it on just like how he'd seen many mermaids wear it. Straight away Luffy disliked it. It was tight around his ribs like a snake was constricting his body. Why did they wear these? Luffy snapped the tight clothing off and threw it far away, panting as found it easier to breathe once again. A few minutes later he'd chosen a white t-shirt with image of a red starfish with the word Crimin on it, though it was a little too big, hanging just above the knees. Secondly, a pair of blue shorts, lucky he was able to fit. Luffy rubbed his hand down the clothing. It felt really weird wearing them, after all he hadn't covered himself in ages. Now it just felt unnatural. Just then a beastly rumble voiced itself. Luffy clenched his belly with a groan. I'm hungry, drool dripping out of his mouth at the thought of food. He was starving like he hadn't eaten in weeks, even though a guard had thrown him large chunk of meat, but that wasn't enough. Yosh, time to find some food, stating his next objective, he then sniffed the air like a vacuum. That way. Food, he called, dashing off towards the delicious smell. It wasn't long after that Luffy was carelessly running back into the town, this way and that, until halting in front of a small food bar. Taking in the warm, tasty scent, Luffy grinned and hopped into the building and towards the counter. Luffy tiptoed and smiled at the barkeep. What'd want, kid? The fishman turned, looking at the head of black hair curiously. Luffy looked up to the tall, green-scaled man before speaking. Only no sound came out. Luffy was shocked to say the least, dropping his head and eyes wide as trembling fingers touched his lips. He can't talk. The thought was scary, though he should have expected this after so long of being isolated, unable to speak to anyone. Determined to get some meat, Luffy came up with a small idea. Oi kid, you hear me? I asked what you want. Approaching the small figure, still only being able to see the black mess of hair, till it moved. Luffy had lifted his head, looking at the other straight on as he repeatedly pointed to his open mouth. It was minute that he stopped the action, watching full-blown eyes stare down on him, displaying something akin to fear. Luffy didn't like those eyes at all. Yo, there's a human child here. The barkeeper yelled. Everyone quickly turned, their eyes spotting the boy. Luffy panicked as he saw the costumers moving away from him, some with nervous eyes, others filled with hate. They don't know who I am, right? What's a human child doing here? Maybe it's one of the pirates, kids. Get it out of here. Someone call the Neptune soldiers. Luffy swiftly made his escape as soon as he heard the mention of soldiers. He ran as far as he could, using the alleyways so no one would see him, and kept on going until he no longer heard the yells. He was starving, already he has sneaked around snatching pieces of food without anyone seeing. The problem was that it was only shellfish or some fruit, he needed meat. Collapsing onto the ground, Luffy whined as his tummy gave out a painful growl. Then it seemed as if fate was on his side as a juicy taste wafted by and it was close. Following his nose once more, he came to the edge of the alley and was faced with a bustling crowd. Observing the crowd, Luffy quickly targeted a bag that was giving of the tempting smell. He would have bolted right then and there for the food, but there were a couple of problems. One being that his food was being carried by someone and that person was walking off with his meat. Carefully Luffy followed the bag. Peering over a corner, he spotted the source of the tasty meat. He drooled so much that it was making his very own sea at his feet. Standing there was a two tall figures. By their stenches Luffy could say that the large blue figure was a fishman and the other being human. But Luffy was more focused on the later one, that was holding his delicious meat. He was very strange looking in Luffy's opinion as he eyed the all-white clothing, and his hair was the weirdest he'd ever seen, shaped at the front and sticking out. It was round and puffy. It looks like cotton candy. Suddenly his thoughts of whether the hair would be tasty was interrupted as a uniformed form vastly approached, calling out to the two men. "Boss Jimbei." The two men looked to the running Solitaire. "What is it?" Jimbei asked. "We need your help. There seems to be a commotion at one of the bars." "Commotion? Is anyone hurt?" "It doesn't seem so. But it seems important. They insist to call for the soldiers." Very well, I'll deal with the issue. Which area is it?" They quickly informed them on the location before being ordered back. Jimbei turned back to Tatch before bowing his head slightly. "I'm afraid that I must leave." "Don't want any help?" "Of course not, it's most likely a small matter. Though I regret not being able to see Pops depart personally." "Nah, don't worry about it, Pops will understand. It's good to know that everything is in safe hands while we are away. We look forward to seeing you again." Tatch grinned at the larger fishman. "Take care, Jimbei. You too. Tell Pops I wish him well." Then Jimbei dashed off down the main street. Thatch smiled, watching his dear friend leave back into town. "Well then, I better hurry or he's going to blow a fuse," Tatch said, speaking to no one but himself. Adjusting the new bags in his arms, he then turned and continued towards the docks. The man hummed a cheery tune, walking through the streets of Fishman Island, but somehow he can't get rid of this feeling that someone's watching him. He pondered as to who it would be. He doubted it was a marine or a bounty hunter unless they were completely idiotic to attack him in Pop's territory. Can't be too careful. A thought struck him, maybe it one of my beloved fans. He grinned, the image of beautiful mermaid trailing after him, hiding because she nervous to ask him out. "Ah, my beauty, no need to be shy." He spun around, but was confused as to why there was no mermaid beauty behind him. No one was there. Except for the various fishmen and mermaids staring at him curiously, some probably thinking he was crazy, before continuing with their own lives. Thatch felt his cheeks heat, embarrassed how he possibly looked. But that weird feeling was still there. Observing the crowd once more, he doesn't see anything or anyone notable. He glanced at a nearby alley, peering at it suspiciously as if it was calling out to him, though it didn't look out of the ordinary. Maybe his fan was extremely shy. "Don't hide from Thatchy." He leapt in front of the alleyway, and once again he faced disappointment, finding it empty. He pouted, upset slightly that there was no shy fan following him. Even his pompadour seemed to droop. "Thatch, what are you doing?" Jumping from the sudden voice, he turned facing a familiar blonde figure. "Marco, what you doing here?" "Looking for you. You were supposed to be at the Moby Dick 20 minutes ago." Marco crossed his arms, demonstrating his annoyance. "Wasn't Jimbei with you?" "Yeah, he was, but he had to leave due to some business." "Oh, and what are you doing down an alley?" "I was looking for my fan." This caused Marco to roll his eyes, turning around and walking away, followed by the redhead. "Don't look at me like that. They're real. I swear someone was following me. And you thought it was a fan of yours of all things." "Well, of course, who else could be? I mean, no beauty could resist this handsome face," Tetch said with a smug face. Marco sighed, rubbing away the oncoming headache. "We don't have time for this, we need to get back soon." "What's the rush?" "Just got a call. A few newbies causing trouble on Pop's turf in the New World. Not really strong, but Pops wants to sail out as soon as possible." It took a while to walk to the docks due to the large groups of people. The surrounding area was unusually busy, however the brothers noted the amount of ships that were docked. "Is it just me, or is there more ships all of a sudden?" "You're not imagining it. Most likely something happened on Sabayati causing every ship to flee. Wonder what happened. You go on ahead, I'll see if I can find anything out." Thatch nodded, walking towards the edge of the docks, where he could see a gigantic ship that had a front shaped as a white whale's head. He watched the various crew members that he called brothers moving around the Moby Dick as he boarded and crossed the deck, heading for the kitchen. Entering the room and places the heavy bags onto the table, as he inspected each bag. 3 bags of vegetables, 1 of mixed herbs, 2 of fishman candies, 3 of seafood and 2 bags of meat. With everything checked, Thatch began to store away the seafood first. Grabbing the 3 bags, he carried them across the kitchen towards multiple steel doors. Opening one, he placed the food inside the cold fridge. Slam! Thatch jolted up, facing the entrance, but to his shock found no one standing there. Wind. Nah, there's no wind down here. Must be imagining things, he thought as returned to the task at hand. However, as his hand paused just as he was about to grab another bag, that same feeling of being watched had returned, and now it was closer. What bothered him most was that it was in his own kitchen and he couldn't see who it was. Looking around, Thatch found nothing out of place, but that feeling continued to nag him. Then an idea came to him. After all, he's the prank master of this ship. It's got to be one of his brothers trying to get back at him for one of his many tricks. He smirked. "Think you can pull a fast one on me, Hate to tell you this, but you're 100 years too early if you think you can prank me. Now show yourself." From the side he saw one of the chairs twitch. Got you. Thatch carefully approached one of the galley tables which said chair was at. Peering down with predatory eyes as he suddenly pounced down to the floor, staring victoriously at the empty space under the table. What are you up to now, Thatch? Marco was standing at the galley entrance, spying his brother laying down on the floor. Looking between his older man and the empty space, before Thatch got up while mumbling that he wasn't doing anything. Marco quirked an eyebrow at the terrible lie but left it, instead took a seat at one of the tables. So did you find out what the commotion was about? Yeah, you wouldn't believe it. Turns out some rookie started a fight at the human shop, the interesting bit being that they took out the celestial dragons that were visiting Sabayati. This piece of information left Thatch speechless while his jaw just hung there as if his brother had just told him that all the emperors were going to have a large tea party. What? He exclaimed. Man, what were they thinking? Not that they didn't have it coming to them. But seriously, that's insane to think some newbie had some guts to go against them. Either that or a complete idiot. I hope it's the first. Their bounty will no doubt increase and all the Marines will be targeting them from now on. We'll certainly be hearing about more of the details in the newspaper. Hey, don't you think we should stick around longer then, with this amount of ships about? Pop said it was alright. Jimbei can handle it and if he needs any help we'll send someone, Marco reassured the other, before watching Thatch walking back to the kitchen counter. What the fuck? Thatch angrily yelled, glaring at the bags sitting on the counter. When I find who it was they're going to pay. Thatch threatened. What's wrong, Thatch? What wrong? What wrong? My meat is gone, that's what's wrong. It was what I was going to cook tonight. Tonight? Yes, tonight. Do you know how hard it is to get meat at this island? Close to impossible, that's my problem. It's all gone. How can it all be gone? Damn, I bet it was the person that was hiding earlier. I knew someone was there. Why the hell are you smiling? Just the thought that one of our brothers for once got by you is actually amusing. Anyhow, I wouldn't stress over it too much, we've still got plenty in storage from shopping earlier, Marco explained. That's not the point, Thatch groaned, drooping his head. You're just upset that some was able to slip past you. It won't happen again. Somewhere on the ship Luffy's just finished eating the tasty meat and was left nibbling on the bones. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Nest of Brothers by Shadow Dragon 1717. Chapter 5, Settling In. As Thatch ranted on his vengeance, Luffy had snuck past easily. He had dragged the bag down some stairs, through a corridor and into the first room he chose by naming the doors by food. He ended up choosing pork and hid in the room. How nobody saw or heard him, well, nobody will ever know. Luffy ripped the meat apart like paper with his teeth, devouring all of it at an impossible pace. Though who could blame him, it wasn't like he was well fed by that bad man, giving constant scraps. He hated the times the would starve H. Shaking his head, Luffy pushed back the horrid memories. Determined not to let it get him down, his focused back onto the task at hand. Or more specifically in his hands. A few minutes before the bag of food had been completely eaten up, not even leaving the bones since he could use his dragon's teeth to make quick work of them. Luffy patted his blown-up belly, looking completely content, and rolled onto his back without a care in the world. It was nice as he listened to the various sounds. To the side, there's a porthole, but it was completely dark as though it was underwater. He watched the multicolored fish swim by, quietly. Suddenly he sat up when a pair of thumbing reached his ears, drawing closer. Scrambling, Luffy spun around, but the room was completely filled with barrels. Choosing to hide in one, he moves to one. Opening a barrel, his actions are halted when he saw that it was filled with water. He was in a water store. No way was Luffy able to hide in any of the barrels. With his devil fruit he'd no doubt drown. Shutting the lid, he surveys any last possible places. There, in the corner was another stack of barrels. However, just behind it, he spotted something. There was a rotten hole in the flooring. As the footsteps closed in, he ran to it. Luffy was sure that it was big enough for a bear cub to crawl through, so deemed it good enough for himself. Silently he descended below the boards until he was completely swallowed by the darkness. Listening, he knew the humans were above, though their voices muffled. There was a thump and a scrap, assuming that they had just plucked a barrel and was now dragging it away. Luffy waited for the men to disappear before moving once more. It was 5 minutes, till the sounds started fading to nothing. Luffy released his breath. He didn't realize he was holding. Being below, his eyes had adjusted to the darkness, so when shuffling around he spots an opening. Curious to explore, Luffy inched forward. For a man, it would be impossible to move through, but Luffy with his small body it was easy, especially with his devil fruit abilities. His rubber body squeezing through the tight spaces and rounding the beams was no trouble. Finally, he reached the end and found that it didn't lead out. Instead there was a boxed space. Moving to the center, he noted the space was large enough to fit his body and more. Though it was still dark, it had a small glow as light slipped between the boards above. But importantly, there were no hatches and it was extremely filthy, so the area had never been used. Even if it was dusty, Luffy deemed it to be cozy and warm. Yawning, he allowed his body to transform into his natural form, however not to his full size. It was obvious that Luffy had forgotten that he was wearing clothes as he was now laying in said torn clothing. The shorts had completely split from the sudden change in size, whereas the shirt was torn at the sleeves and collar but stretching around his scaly body. Luffy whined at the results, knowing that he'll be needing to find more clothes. For now, he curled up and laid his head down. And for the first time, the sound of chains didn't accompany the rocking of the ship, peacefully lulling him to sleep. A cold room, a hot coal pit, and looming figures with Cheshire Cat smiles. He felt something heavy pin him down onto his front and chains rattle as his limbs panicked. He cried as the men's dark laughter drew closer. He regretted looking over his shoulder. Standing there, one of the shadows held high a glowing iron pole before striking down. Luffy had screamed, till his throat was raw, but the pain would stop. The images became erratic, changing to worse and worse images each time. Boom! Luffy opened his eyes instantly and nearly jumped up but knocked his head on the wood above. Luffy rubbed abused spot, though it didn't actually hurt, more out of habit. His vision was blurry due to the welled-up tears, so it was to tell where was. But the scent of sea salt and Adam's wood relaxed him. It wasn't much, but at least there wasn't the familiar smell of blood and rusty iron. At least he wasn't there. Boom! Another rumble shook the ship, back and forth. Placing his head on the wall, Luffy heard further violent splashing and rumbles outside. It was all accompanied by the hollers of the crew and creaking of the vessel. The situation wasn't unfamiliar to Luffy. He had been in multiple sea storms before, though in his opinion this seemed to be rougher than all the others. Luffy hated it. He hated its loud voice as if roaring at him. His dislike grew even more when his so-called owner had found this out and would chain him outside in the rain. Lucky the lightning had never hit his chain. He heard many times that it hurt like crazy. Even Ace refused to fly during storms, warning Luffy that was dangerous. Whining, Luffy curled in on himself, his tail wrapping tightly as if to protect him. He blocked out the storm's cries, squeezing both eyes hoping it would end soon. It didn't, continuing on for hours, but eventually, the darkness was able to take Luffy, sheltering him from any more nightmares, allowing him to settle. Later on, awaking once, Luffy was greeted by his warm, little space. It was different for the little dragon that he needed to think back to the prior day's events, along with his whereabouts. Snorting, Luffy flopped back down, knowing that no guard was going to disturb him. And he enjoying the peace, rolling about in his little den. On the other hand, the surface was hard, rough, and scratched uncomfortably against his scales. Even along his reptilian body a couple of scratches had appeared. Glaring down, Luffy claws at the wood a little. The last time he had a proper bed was with his brothers, which they made themselves, though he would mainly sleep on his actual brothers than their bed. Thought of a soft bed was nice, and if this was to be his hideout then it needed to be more comfortable. He nodded to himself before crawling away. Climbing out from beneath the boards, he shook his body and stretched out like a cat. Multiple pops race up his sore body and relieving the cramped muscles. Luffy left the water store room and casually walked back down the corridor from yesterday. He peeked behind each door, finding a sail room, cable room, and more rooms filled with barrels. One room was even dedicated to sake, Luffy reclosing the door instantly due to the strong odor overwhelming his nose. Finally he climbed the steep stairs leading to the deck that came through the other day. Reaching the top, he inspects the outside before slithering up the last steps. There was no life to be seen. The upper deck was bare with the exception of puddles scattered about. It was still quite dark with a few sun rays seeping over. It was most likely too early, so the crew would still be sleeping, exhausted from the thunderstorm. Smiling at this, Luffy leapt across the decking and jumped playfully into the pools of water. He ran in every direction, excited to be. Raising his head, his eyes sparkled excitedly, admiring the chair that was seated in the midst of the ship. It's huge. Luffy climbed the tall armrest, till he sat at the top. The blue chair was worn but soft as he kneads the material with his feet. To the side, he spots something. He morphs back to his child form, then moves to the seat and plops himself down. Now sitting in a large imprint of someone, dipping low in the seat. A giant must sit here. That's so cool. Luffy comparing his tiny form to the imprint. Though he stared forward for a second. Why is it here? The view's boring. Don't they want to see the sea? Luffy quirked his head with a simple expression. His head started to strain, so he fell backward, comfortably laying on his back. The chair was cozy, he could lay there for hours watching the cloud float. Luffy blinked once then twice. Suddenly he shot up, no taking his eyes off it. He bounced off the furniture and scuffled to the port side of the Moby's railing. Pushing his head between the posts and glancing up, then down at the rushing waves that crashed upon the hull. He stared at the water questionably, then his face strikes into recognition. Finally becoming aware that they were no longer underwater, instead, they were on the surface. The thought excited Luffy that he wanted to get a better view. Turning completely around, he bounded towards the deck's center until he was at the foot of the main mast. Luffy crouched down and swings his arm back. Gumo Gumo no, the arm stretched out impossibly high and grabbed above the main royal, causing Luffy to catapult himself amongst the white sails. Only to have Luffy smack face first into the mast's top and cling onto it. But the pain quickly ebbed away at the sight of the sky-kissing ocean for as far as anyone could possibly see. It was a familiar welcoming sight, the air glowing orange as the sun rose from its watery blanket and glittered on the sea. It was beautiful, staring out as the wind whispered across his skin and sweeping through his raven locks. Of course, it would be even better sharing this moment. Ace, Sabo. There was nothing at first, so he repeated the thought once again. There was silence. But then Luffy felt a budding warmth from the bond, though one being faster than the other. Nay, Sabo, look, it's just like back in East Blue. He smiled lovingly, never taking his eyes off the view, reminiscing with his happy memories. Just then the second presence was full awakening. And Luffy giggled. Ace was always the slower one in the mornings. Thinking back to multiple times when Sabo would ask Luffy to wake him up, only for Ace to scold them, saying there were better ways to wake him than have Luffy bounce on him. His mind gradually drifted away, thinking back to what happened then. Ace, Sabo, from now on I'll live my life freely. Just as promised, he solemnly smiled towards the scenery. Meanwhile, the bond tingled, his brothers reminding that they'll be doing it together. A hand gently clasps the marks. Yeah, they'd be alright, they together and are free. It had been a long time since he felt this, but that's what he felt, free. Squawk. Interrupting the chilled morning, a white bird signaled their presence, fly towards the ship. It was unusual bird compared to the rest. Being roughly the same size as Luffy, it wore a hat and had a bag and something else strapped around to their body. Drawing closer, Luffy recognized as one of those news coups that would give those papers when one of the adults in Fuchsia village brought one. Though Luffy couldn't read, so Makino would read pieces to him, and when moving to the mountains, well, Sabo took over that. While reminding Luffy it was a good way to gather information, but Luffy was more interested in hearing about exciting stories on pirates than that. Reminiscing, he followed the animal. When the feathered creature swooped down, Luffy instantly ducked behind the mast, becoming conscious of the sudden pirate that the bird landed next to. Did he see me? He held his position for a second before peering over the side. He was aware that the stranger was facing away as he tried to exchange with the news coup. Using the opportunity, Luffy quietly drew out his claws and descended along mast on the opposing side of the pirate. So not to be seen. When touching the bottom, he's faced with a familiar door to the galley. Checking that the other was still distracted, Luffy between the door. Upon entering the room, he dived under the tables. A sweet aroma filled the room as well as the scent of a man. Weaving under the tables, Luffy checks his company. It was the puffy redhead he'd followed yesterday, gliding around the kitchen side. What was his name? Coming up blank, he nicknamed the man, Beaver Hair, because by Luffy's logic his hair was round and puffy looking like a beaver, not to mention it stuck out like one's tail, so, Beaver Hair, it was. Watching Beaver Hair, he assumed him to be a cook. Luffy's jaw hung as the other cracked eggs, chopping and mixing various bowls, creating tempting smells that Luffy just wanted to bolt over. But he held his place waiting for his moment to possibly snatch some more food. Even some bacon. Not long after, the previous pirate from the deck entered. Luffy stilled, eyes following the sandaled feet as they headed for him. When they seated themselves nearby, Luffy froze, hoping the other won't feel how close he was. After he was sure that it's safe, Luffy turned away. But something had him pause. Glancing to the long limbs that reeked something other than human. The smell was curious. Crawling dangerously close, Luffy sniffed. He couldn't understand what it was, he never smelled anything like it. The closest thing he could compare it to was ash. He pulled back when the legs suddenly adjusted themselves. However, Luffy, wondering about the owner of the scent, leaned slowly between the legs, till he saw the stranger's face. If the man looked down right now, Luffy would certainly be seen. Observing the man, Luffy recognized him to be Beaverhead's friend. But being the one that was following them, Luffy wasn't able to get a good look at the man, till now. The man carried this tired expression, his eyes drooping low, though it made the man look mature unlike the other occupant in the room. Another standing feature was his hair. Why does he have bananas on his head? But it doesn't look tasty. The thought of food suddenly caused his stomach to groan. Luffy blushed and jerked back from the man, at the noise. Next hugs his midsection as to quieten it. Mark, if you want seconds you can ask. After all, how could you resist wanting more of my cooking? That wasn't me. The statement had caused everything to go silent. Marco. It was early morning when Marco stepped from his room and out onto the deck. He yawned, walking down the stairs to the rails. It like any other morning, he thought. Looking around, he sees the amount of water on deck the storm had left. It wouldn't be too good to leave it as it was, so he puts a reminder away to have a division clear it later. Who's that? He raised an eyebrow, looking upward. Upon the main mast sat a figure. Marco wasn't able to pick out any features as they were so high up. Squawk. Marco turned as the news coup flew towards him and landed on the Moby's railing. The bird gave another caw, so he walks over to it. Reaching into his pant pocket and picked out some loose belly. Slotting it into the money box strapped to the creature, he then pulled out a newspaper from its satchel. The news coup bows in gratitude and once again took off to the skies. Looking up once more, Marco found that the person had vanished, leaving an empty space. There wasn't anyone climbing down the rigging even. Did he imagine it? Rubbing his head, he passed it off that he was still drowsy from sleep. Some coffee would be nice. Marco stepped up the stairs and opened the galley door. Stepping into the room, he is greeted by the smell of breakfast. He already knows that it was Thatch in the kitchen, doing his usual routine of preparing the food before the ship started to wake. "Morning, Mark," his brother greeted with his energetic smile. Marco wondered how the man had so much energy in the morning, not to mention for the rest of the day. Marco gave a brief nod in response. "Coffee please, Thatch," Marco requested, moving further into the room and seating himself down at his usual table. It wasn't long till said coffee was placed in front of him, along with a warm plate of breakfast. Another long day ahead. Thatch returned back to his preparations. Just one of those mornings, he rubbed between his eyes. After eating his food, he leaned back onto his chair with coffee in hand. As soon as he folded out the newspaper, all attention drawn in by the headlines. Rookie brothers attack celestial dragons. So there are still idiots out there willing to stand up to those bastards. Leaning over, he reads the article with interest. Fire Fist Ace and Mad Hatter Sabo cause riot at auction house situated at Dock 1 on Sabayati Archipelago. The first attack happened during the auction by the Rookie brothers, who assaulted 2 celestial dragons and released a Cyclops, which was to be sold at auction that ate the remaining occupants of the room, including the royal nobles. Then the rest continued talking how hard the Marines fought to save the nobles, also that all slaves had run and that there were rewards for anyone who captures them. Marco felt slightly sorry, thinking to the poor slaves that were now on the run for the rest of their lives. There was little information on the new pirates, even how they escaped. Just that due to the amount of fire and loose Cyclops, the 2 captains were able to run. They're definitely not allowing the public know how they let someone assault a celestial, much less get away with it, Marco thought. He turned a page and revealed 2 wanted posters. Spreading them out, Marco observed them both. They displayed 2 men, and from Marco guessed they were quite young as the faces stared back at him. The first with black hair and freckles. He gave off a devilish smile. While was that fire on him? A devil fruit. Marco glanced thinks back to the article. Guess that's how he got the nickname Fire Fist. Looking to the other poster boy fitted his own nickname as well. The pirate being nicknamed is Mad Hatter, by how well dressed and held himself. The blonde teen was bowing his top hat with eyes smiling evilly to the camera. Unlike the other, he presented a mature feel about him. Honestly, the 2 didn't look like brothers. The only similarity the 2 shared was the dark look, as if someone was being greeted by hell. Those eyes were deep and held so much hatred. Marco quirks his eyebrows at this. How much hatred can someone hold? Just the thought of these 2 rookies coming to the new world brought Marco to sigh. Hopefully, they won't be stupid enough to assault any of Pop's territories. "What's up, Mark?" Thatch calls over from his station. "Just thinking about troubling youngsters and most likely be causing us more stress in the future." Marco slumped back on his chair. "Keep talking like that, you'll start turning into an old geezer." Thatch snickered. "By the way, Doma will be dropping by next week." "Doma, be nice to see how that guy's been. Heard that he got into a bar fight then, one with a vice admiral. Can't wait to hear what happened this time. They're going to stay a few days, that'll be enough to exchange your stories. Though I'd advise you to not aggravate his companion this time. Not my fault if the ape can't take a joke. Seriously, he nearly killed me." Thatch whined, remembering his last encounter with the mammal. "For shooting you he had every right. Being hammered and telling it monkey jokes probably isn't a good idea. Honestly, none of yours ever are." Marco smirked at his brother. "Come on, my jokes are genius. Especially the hungry monkey story." Suddenly a rumble interrupts the 2's conversation. Assuming what it was, Thatch grins at his brother. "Mark, if you want seconds you can ask. After all, how could you resist wanting more of my cooking?" Marco gave his idiot brother a stern look. "It wasn't me." His words silenced the room. The sound had been close, but no else was supposed to be in the room but the 2 commanders. Surveying the room confirmed that no one had just entered. Even so, the noise had been closer than any of the entrances. His attention then focused onto all the tables surrounding them, especially at the one he was sitting at. Not making sudden movement, Marco started to slip from his chair, lowering himself. Then entrance swung open, presenting a sudden presence. "Morning, you 2. Entering was a character dressed in a pink kimono, a red garment with black spots wrapping their midsection. As well as having the hair and pale complexion that complete the look of a Japanese doll. "Hey, Izo." "Morning." The 2 greeted the 16th commander, who joined them. "Marco, what are you doing down there?" The man looked at him questionably, seating himself down. Marco glanced beneath the table, seeing only the legs of other seats. "Nothing," the blonde commented, rising back up from the floor. Izo shrugged, satisfied with the answer. Though Marco looked to Thatch hoping he'd seen anything. Obviously not, as Thatch gave him that clueless expression. "Luffy." Meanwhile, in a room next door, Luffy huffed as he tried to calm his beating heart. "Crap, they nearly caught me." It was a miracle that saved him. Using the distraction to escape quickly, lucky he hadn't knocked anything as he snuck to the next door. Looking up, he's stunned. He had stepped into heaven because he was standing in the food storage room. So much food decorated the room that Luffy didn't wait, he bounded further into the tasty forest. grabbing and eating anything he could reach, and that was everything. The food was disappearing so fast, almost like magic. The show only stopped till he filled his black hole. Once finished, he checked the porthole and door and found that most of the ship was awake, meaning that he was stuck. But this was Luffy and refused to stay still. Time passed, till he spots a vent in the wall. Pulling off the screen, without faulting, climbed through. Luffy was unable to see the end but kept on. Reaching the first exit, he observed through the screen. The room was dim, so he was unable to see clearly but made out roughly that it was a bedroom. Seeing there's no movement, Luffy slowly crept out from the hiding spot. Getting a better look of the room, Luffy saw that it was a fine room painted with white walls and yellow trim, and the furniture was simple but looked well crafted. As he continued to gradually explore the area, his eyes landed on a cloth. A giant white one hanging from a wall, and looking at it an idea crossed Luffy. Suddenly wanting the item, when stepping towards it, the floor creaked into the silence. There was a loud snore, directing Luffy's attention to a bed. A bulky form laid on it, snoring that could be compared to an elephant's, though the man must have been bigger than one. Luffy assumed the man was sick cause of all the various tubes and machines he was attached to. But despite all the equipment, Luffy still sensed that this man was incredibly strong. Careful not to disturb the giant, Luffy kept low to the floor and reached for the cloth. Touching it was thick and worn yet pleasantly soft, just like the chair had been. When yanking it, he gave a silent gasp as the cloth fell, cloaking his form in white. Luffy shuffled under the fabric before finally popping his head out the edge. He glanced once more to the bed, finding the man had rolled but was still asleep. Happy he hadn't awoken the human, Luffy carried the item, retreating to the vent with it dragging along behind him. His mission complete, Luffy vanished into the walls. Marco. A while later, Marco knocked on the cabin door, patiently waiting outside. He heard some shuffling before the door opened, watching his captain stepping out into the morning sun. "Morning, Pops," Marco smiled, stepping aside for him to pass. Pops casually walked by towards the captain chair. As Marco followed, he observed his father. Something was off. The man wasn't attached to his fours or pulling any along like he should do, but that wasn't anything new. Though, Pops would get scolded by the doctor again. But wasn't it? Going through a checklist, it then slapped Marco in the face. So obvious. "Pops, you not wearing your coat?" "Yeah, it appears I misplaced it. Wasn't in my room." The comment surprised Marco. It wasn't like his father to lose his things, much less his coat, as he always kept it on, hardly taking it off. "I'll have some members search for it," Marco responded. "Don't stress too much about it. It'll turn up eventually." Whitebeard lowers into his personal chair. However, settling down, his hand brush over something. Lifting his hand slightly, he notices a few tears in the armrest. Seems that things keep on happening this morning, fingers feeling along the tears. "Son, we'll be needing to replace this chair. I'll add it to the list." Whitebeard nodded in appreciation. Unbeknownst to the Whitebeard pirates, their new little passenger was settling down below them in his tiny den. Luffy snuggling into the captain's coat is his new nest.